a program by, for, and about women today, with Sandra Elkin.
Good evening and welcome to Woman. Tonight, a discussion of pornography. With me is Loretta Darling. Loretta is Secretary of Citizens for a Decent Community. Citizens for a Decent Community is an affiliate of Citizens for Decency Through Law. Loretta works with such groups as Morality in Media and Catholics United for the Faith. Also with me is Susan Brownmiller, author of Against Our Will, Men, Women, and Rape. Susan is a longtime feminist activist. She was named in 1975 by Time magazine as one of 12 Women of the Year. Also with me is Dr. Anke Ehrhardt. Dr. Ehrhardt is an associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Pediatrics at the State University of New York at Buffalo. Dr. Ehrhardt is known for her work in the field of psychoendocrinology and sex research. She has co-authored with Dr. John Money the book Man, Woman, Boy, and Girl. Welcome to all of you.
Hi.
Let's define pornography first of all.
Oh, Sandy, my definition is so simple. It's also rhetorical. I call pornography strictly anti-female propaganda. In fact, the essence of anti-female propaganda.
Loretta.
I think I agree with her, and the only thing I would add to that is it is also anti-moral. I think that it goes against all of our Judeo-Christian ethics, and that's what I find offensive, that and the fact that it does degrade women.
Anke, do you want to do that or not?
Well, I think it's very hard to define it. Both of you really have defined it, what it can do, but not really what it is. As far as in content, in general, I think people talk about pornography as erotic depiction or sexual depiction of men or women or animals with people in sexual intercourse poses. So at what point it becomes pornography and at what point it is art is, over the centuries, really a matter of taste.
I think it's beyond a matter of taste.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we're talking about a Michelangelo statue or I know what I'm talking about. I would like to see, oh, well, we'll jump in right to what we, right to the conclusions, right? I'd like to see the banning. I'd like to see, there have to be limits, it seems to me, on what we can have in front of us. And I think that a culture that says that the presentation of the rape of women, the torture of women, and even the murder of women, and presents these and says, this is erotic stimulation, that is a culture in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And that certainly is a staple now of hardcore pornography, rape, torture, and murder of women.
Well,
also, the presentation of the master-slave relationship for erotic stimulation and pleasure. That's all kinds of bondage, all kinds of women tied up in chains and in leather, and all kinds of men standing over them with whips and terrorizing them.
Well, I think there are now already two different issues which you have brought up. One is should we allow any kind of erotic art, any kind of pornography, or any kind of erotic depiction?
Well, you see, erotic art is a phrase I can't really relate to, because I don't consider a picture that shows the mutilation of a woman to be erotic art.
Well, I think, but what you don't consider, it's so much a matter of personal judgment. Who's going to make the judgment? What is permissible erotic depiction, and what is pornography?
But I think
which should be
hold
banned?
it a second. Loretta wants to say something.
Well, I just think, I think the definition could go on forever. I think when you open the centerfold of, let's say, Hustler magazine, I think you get a gut feeling inside of you. You know that it is morally wrong. You know that sex being depicted with 3 people or with animals or sexual acts involving children, you know that's morally wrong. And I don't think that you need to define pornography to know that. I think you instinctively know that. And that's one of the dangers about pornography, is that the generation now have always had pornography. They have always not had prayer in school. They have always lived in an abortion society. So therefore, it is going to be doubly hard for them to know instinctively that pornography is wrong.
Let's talk about what we know about it for sure.
Can we, before we do that, Sandra, I would just like to, take argument with that instinctively knowing. that has changed, of course, dramatically in history. What to know, what is instinctively knowing
That was the
what is
point that
wrong.
I was making, that the children now will never instinctively know that pornography is wrong.
30 years ago, people knew in Germany instinctively that Picasso was wrong, and Picasso was indecent art, and that why he was banned. Then one knew.
Hold on. While we're on Nazi Germany,
Susan?
pornography flourished in Nazi Germany. I have to, because there's a misconception about Nazi Germany that I have to clear up. Pornography flourished under Hitler, and a guy named Julius Streicher
That's not the
ran
point,
an
though.
obscene, pornographic, anti-Semitic newspaper.
Right.
Well, it's connected to my point that pornography is propaganda, anti-whatever group. They used pornography in Germany to make anti-Semitic
Well,
points.
I don't,
Let
I
Anke
haven't-
finish her point.
Okay.
My point is
Yeah.
that at that point, at that time, there was a declaration what was decent art and what was indecent art,
Yeah.
right? And people decided instinctively, with the conscience of the population, what the rest of the population could not see anymore. It doesn't matter what content, really. As soon as you get into that one class of people decides for the rest of the class, and usually claiming that they, have the God's truth on their side by instinct or by whatever reason, then you're really in a great dilemma that very soon all kinds of things can be banned, which are very much up to personal taste.
Even saccharin.
Well, we have
Well,
have
I mean,
made-
as a smoker,
Susan?
people. Well, all right, I'm sorry. I'll be quieter.
we have made obscenity the new frontier in defense of freedom of speech. I mean, it seems to be that
They
way.
have made obscenity. The pornographers making their millions of dollars are screaming First Amendment all the way to the bank. Yes.
And I know
Yeah.
that you don't feel that that's a valid thing.
No, I agree. It was Justice Potter Stewart who said, you don't have to define pornography, you know it when you see it.
That's right.
And to a large extent, that is true. It's less true today because the techniques of the pornographers have gotten so much more sophisticated. One of the ways we used to recognize it, in addition to its explicit and distorted sexual content, was that it always looked bad because they didn't have terrific cameramen and they didn't use wonderful color. Now, of course, better, I'd even say they were artists of the camera, have gotten into it, and it is getting confusing. Also, pornographic material, hardcore pornographic stuff, is creeping into art films where it never used to be before. So more people are genuinely confused today about what is pornography, what is not, where you should draw the line. But Justice Earl Warren said once that free speech is too important a tradition in this country, and the right of political dissent is too important a tradition to be muddied by the obscenity question. And that's my position. I mean, I am someone who dissents a great deal. I am an atheist. I've never been a cold warrior. My book on rape challenges the male establishment. So I value my freedom of political dissent, but I don't want anyone telling me that these pornographers are practicing free speech and that they should be protected.
But Susan, what you see that doing to our families, in justification of free speech, when you see that pornography does destroy families and it does destroy lives, and you see women, I can imagine in a home where.
What do you mean with destroying?
Okay, well,
Loretta, you, I don't know if you know this or not, Anke, but Loretta has a radio show. And
I'm on a radio show.
She's on a radio show.
Right.
And you might talk specifically about what people are saying to you.
Okay, the thing that I would object to, first of all, is if my husband were into pornography, I would object to Hustler being my foreplay and having him read it and go, honey, come on up, and being no more than a receptacle for his sperm. I would resent that because I don't think that's what love is supposed to be or sex is supposed to be. But in the home, I talked to a man this week who he went to a movie and accidentally halfway through, or in the beginning, found out it was an X-rated movie, and his wife said, you don't have to stay, we'll go. So they left. He said he went back the next night, and every night thereafter for years. And he said it was never enough. He could not see enough, he could not buy enough, he could not view enough. He got into homosexual films, and he said, I was at the point where I knew that it was not enough to view it. I had to be a participant.
Listen, if you talk about single examples, it's very important to talk about more than one person.
This happens over and over again. These are the people
Well,
that come to our organization who.
Let's look at how many people really look at pornography extensively in our population. And we have really very good studies on that. Mainly still the best report is the Pornography Commission report, Commission on Pornography in
1970.
1970, and
Yeah.
several of those studies have been updated in the meantime.
But it's before the proliferation of the skin magazines on the newsstands.
Well,
Yeah.
my point is that by that time already, by age 18, 80% of all males in this society and 70% of all females have had very extensive exposure to sexual intercourse pictures, to pornography, not in what you would consider an art form, but to pornographic material. So it clearly, and probably it is higher today because there has been the proliferation. So clearly when we talk about, what does it do if somebody looks at pornography, first of all, we have to recognize that most people have, at a very young age, a lot of exposure to pornography. And so that, to correlate that in one case with what kind of effects it may have on behavior, I think one has to be very, very careful.
But I think we find this in many cases. I think the women that I talk to do feel that they're being used and do feel that they're being degraded. And I wouldn't say that that's a small percentage of women.
Well,
I think any woman who has any intelligence at all would have to feel degraded by what is going on in magazines.
I think that's a different issue now. The
Well-
issue, and I think that's what we have to be very carefully keeping apart. I don't like how women are being shown in pornography. And I don't think there should be all kind of pornographic depiction. I just think that the whole issue is much more complicated. What do you do if you say you want to ban pornography? Who decides and what are the effects? We know what in general happens. Immediately organized crime moves in. People continue to read pornography. I mean, you're not going to stop it.
Organized crime is in it already. I think we can stop it. I really think that we have to accept as a given that human beings are capable of change and change for the better. And we in this country historically have held series of views that in a later generation people said, oh no, we really disavow that. I mean, we went from a culture that said that slavery was normal and was the way that relations went. Some people were masters, some people were slaves. A better thinking came along and we disavowed slavery.
Well,
we
the question
abolished
is
it.
then,
Child labor is something else that at one time was perfectly allowable, now it's not. As a smoker, as I started to say before, I'm under increasing pressure by society to quit that vile habit. They're right. They're absolutely right. Who are they to decide for me? Well, they are deciding in my interest. And when people say about pornography, who's going to decide?
well, then
Well,
we
I
have,
hope I'm one of the people.
well, everybody of course does.
Yeah.
And the various interest groups
Yeah.
do. But then also let's look at the data since
Yeah.
you're concerned. What does it do to women? What does it do to families?
I would like to know, for
Okay.
instance,
Go ahead.
if rapists are connoisseurs of pornography.
Yes, I just wanted to go into that. Also, the possible negative effects if we totally ban erotic depictions.
I wish you wouldn't use the phrase erotic
Well, I don't have such
depictions,
good.
because it's too broad for my definition of pornography.
Well, you see, I
because-
don't have such good instincts that I can just look at and can say what is art and what is pornography. And I think it would, if we get 10
Well,
people
all right.
together.
Are you talking about Hustler magazine? Let's just restrict it to magazines in the Hustler genre.
Right,
For
and,
this,
and,
for this
and
discussion.
let's not name any
Yeah.
magazines.
Yes, which you would not consider erotic art, I assume.
I'm not talking about erotic art. I said depictions of
depictions. Yeah.
sexual acts or,
All right.
or nude people.
Yeah.
Let's
yeah.
leave it with that.
And again, erotic is often, again, as you would agree, in the eye of the beholder.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would not
Absolutely.
consider any of the pictures in Hustler erotic.
Right,
I think
let's get to
Okay.
what you're going to say.
What do we
Yeah.
know, since we all obviously have concerns about the effects? What can it have as far as the status of women on the family, on criminals, as you are saying, rapists? And again, I think it's terribly important to look at data of large groups of people. The best study, and really methodologically a superb study, is by the Kinsey Institute, which came out in the 70s, I think 1974, by Gebhardt and collaborators, which is looked at the experience of sex offenders, 2,500 men, and found that the sex offenders who had committed serious crimes, there was no significant difference in frequency and exposure of pornography than in the other various control groups. There are also, if I can just finish that point, also studies in great detail about rapists, for instance, and committed and incarcerated rapists. And the one fact which has come out, the difference to heterosexual men who do not commit rape crimes, in comparison to that, is that rapists tend to have less exposure to pornography. They tend to have less, and at a later age they begin to become involved than the normal adolescent male. And I think those are very important data.
Well, they're not. When we talk about rape, we're talking about my area of expertise. I think the Gebhardt study was a lot earlier than the date you gave. But all studies of convicted rapists are dealing with a very small part of the raping population, because as we know,
Absolutely
very few rapists got to jail under the laws that we had until fairly recently in this country. So, and there has been very few studies. There have been very few studies of rapists in prison or out of prison or whatever. So the data is minimal to begin with. So I wouldn't
Not
talk
enough. I mean, certainly I wouldn't
yeah,
say
so
minimal,
I
but
could
not
not
enough.
draw any conclusions from the one Gebhardt study. Gebhardt was also the fellow who said that rapists had a rather positive heterosexual adjustment in life compared to his control group, get this, of churchmen and union leaders. That was a Gebhardt contribution, and I put it in my book because it just staggered my mind. I mean, one has to wonder about the standards of heterosexual adjustment that Gebhardt was using. I found a very good pornography study out of Florida State University, and I've forgotten the guy's name. He'll be very annoyed about that. But I had written in my book, and Against Our Will, that to me, the heart of hardcore pornography was the violent aggression against women, the rape, the torture, and the murder of women. I said that on instinct after just cursorily looking at the stuff. He did a study, and he found out that that indeed is the basis of hardcore pornography, acts of violence against women.
That is the
basis of pornography, that is the content of pornography, is the depictions of acts of violence committed
He
against
defined it as that?
women. No, he didn't define it. He studied specific scenes in
Yes.
pornographic books, movies,
Yes.
whatever. And he found that the content, for the most part, was acts of violence committed against women. That was part of the
Susan,
content
I
of
think I lost
pornography.
your point. Go back.
Is he saying that most pornography which is today on the market is that?
Yes, yes, yeah. And I say that this is what leads to the male ideology of rape. And certainly you can't say causally that
No, you
20
can't.
people looking at pornography will then go out and commit 20 acts of rape. We're not suggesting that
Right.
at all. But it certainly promotes the climate.
But if
And it
Is
encourages
there
young men.
conclusive data
There is-
talking
there-
about the
no,
consequences of
No, there's
No,
pornography?
there
not.
is not. No.
And
You
I
talk
think-
to police officers, they'll tell you it's no problem for them at all. They know when they make an arrest of a sex
Right.
offender.
And
whose
you
name is
think
littered.
that also?
I think so. I think in most communities you will find that the number of sex crimes that are solved, of course many of them are not solved, but the ones in our community are linked to pornography.
What do you mean linked?
Well, like we have had four little girls.
Material found or something like that?
Yeah, one man that raped and murdered a little girl had just come from seeing an X-rated movie.
I think there's no
Now,
question about that, no
okay,
argument. But I don't,
right.
I think
But
we
if
have
the
to be very
intent-
careful in linking that in a causal relationship.
Well, I think you can't view it. The intent is to stimulate. And, if you read a good book, you are affected for the good, or else we would not have good books or textbooks or the Bible or anything. Those books affect us for the good, and pornography sure affects us for the bad. It has to stimulate you. It has to...
Well, then, what would you say? I think we have, again, no argument, and there are good studies on showing that, is that in general, let's say, for instance, a sexual intercourse film does have an arousing effect on both men and women. And I'm, for instance, referring to a large, which you may know, large study which was done in Hamburg, Germany. Now, these researchers, Schmidt and Ziegers, then looked at, what happens afterwards. What do these people do afterwards? Well, they don't go out and rape, obviously. They are aroused. They do have more sex in general, but they do not, in general, they have sex in the way with their wife or their girlfriend as they usually have sex.
Okay, that is the point I think that Susan and I are trying to make, is that after seeing a movie like that, To go home and have sex with your wife is degrading. It would be degrading to me if my husband were aroused by an X-rated movie. You know, if I were not woman enough to arouse him sexually, to have him go to see a movie like that or read a book and then look to me for some kind of satisfaction is degrading to me.
Well, in what way? You know, it would depend in what way he would have sex with you.
Well, all right, but Anke, you described the film as a sexual intercourse film. Now, I don't know what that means when I've, in the interests of knowledge is power, when I've looked at pornographic material, I don't merely see the presentation of sexual intercourse. I see a tremendous distortion of acts.
Well, that's I think
And
why
a tremendous distortion of the woman's role in the act.
well, you
But
see,
it seems to me that we could go on forever in this vein, but what I would really like to know from each of you is, you know, what would you do about it, precisely?
Well, I can tell you what we're doing. You know, I think that a community does set standards, and I think in the community, I think if the majority of people were polled, I think the majority of people do not want pornography. We don't want it in our community. I think 85 or 80% of all pornography gets into the hands of children.
Who buys pornography mostly?
Little old men who park down the street who are ashamed to go into the stores, mostly, from going to bookstores to having to pick it or something. They say that these men park down the street. Now, if pornography is so good, why do you have to park down the street? When you go to church, you park in front. But if you go into a bookstore, you park down the street and you must have it in a plain brown wrapper. It seems to me that
Now,
you're
where's
almost
that,
ashamed.
Loretta? That is obviously not Times Square, New York City.
Well, I'm talking about Rochester, and I think communities across the country. You know, you would not be ashamed to park in front of the museum and go in. But men have a thing about going into the bookstores. They park.
Okay, continue telling me what you do about it.
Well, I think I would. A group like ours, I think, does a lot in that we educate people to what pornography does, how I think it does affect the family, what it does do to women, and I think that enough people will become educated that they will join a group that will get it out. We do have laws that say pornography is illegal. Our bookstores are illegal, X-rated movies are illegal, and all we need to do is to get our law enforcement agencies to enforce those laws. We're not.
How?
I think community pressure. An elected official, and I said, I have
Are
5,000
people
people
going to
who
run
will-
into people's, policemen run into people's homes and check out the reading
I'm not
material?
talking about that. I don't think that's against the law to have it in your home.
Well, how are you getting it to your home?
I'm talking about the bookstores.
Well, how are you getting it to your home?
I'm not getting it to my
well,
home. Let's make
but
that.
people who are
Okay, but I think what you have in your home, I think we have to go to the source. You know, the source is the store. If it was not there, you could not have it at home. And I think we just have to look at what it does to a community and to a society, and I think particularly to women.
So you don't think what a common argument is that, you know, we ban pornography, and where does it stop?
No, I
then
don't agree with that.
You don't agree with that?
No, I don't.
Susan, do you have
Do I have any 1, 2, 3 quick, wonderful solutions? I wish I did. I've been puzzling about this for a long
Yeah.
time.
I think we
and
all
I do not have easy solutions. I'll tell you, I'm sure you read the story a couple of months ago in San Francisco. Some crazed person opened up a Nazi bookstore, and the community around it, well, it happened to choose to set it up right across from a synagogue. Anyway, that community was so enraged that they took action against the bookstore, and the bookstore folded its tent and quietly crept away. I wish women could get to a point in our age where we could take this kind of unified action against.
That's what it's going to take. And Susan is right. We can get rid of it. You know, I'm sure that we can. It's just putting forth the effort. You know, if you can close one Nazi bookstore, you can close a pornographic store. But it will take the effort of a community. And I think it's going to be the women that will do it.
Yeah,
you know, we have
Loretta,
to.
it's only going to be the women,
Right.
I think.
Yeah.
I think.
We have a lot of men in our organization who are working, but I think it's time for women to maybe come out of the kitchen for a while and, you know, get them because they deserve it.
Watch out, Loretta, you'll start a revolution.
I hope so.
Well, I think, you know, unfortunately, I don't think that there is any kind of that easy kind of solution, even not yours. I would agree, you know, I'm very much troubled also certainly by the violence and by the kind of excesses of pornography. I would, you know, and I know it's illogical because I'm also for freedom of speech, and I cannot see in any way that's a whole class of sexual material like this is being banned, and I would immediately be concerned by whom and what the consequences would be as far as how people still would get to them, because I know they would get to them. But I'm also, I want to do something about the excesses. And so, and I know that's not quite logical.
How do you say at one point,
Well,
all right,
it is.
this is an excess? I mean, how much, this is too much? I mean, is
Well,
that any easier than saying,
That is for me much easier, but you see, I'm against violence depiction in general, and I don't think the sex part is the important part. I think the brutality and the violence which goes on our television screens every evening, as far as which, the whole family is seen.
that's
I'm
an
just as
interesting
concerned about.
point in that many groups are screaming about the violence on television, but no one is saying if we cut it off and we change these scripts and we force the writers to, change the dialogue, that's a violation of anyone's freedom of speech.
We are seeing
I
that
find that
happening.
interesting.
Well, and it is illogical, because completely, if you are totally logical and say, everything has to be free, then obviously you can't be against that either. I guess my own, if in pornography generally, I'm sure by groups like yours, is not only all the excesses you are talking about, but also, the simple depiction of sexual intercourse. And I would be very strongly against that kind of material is banned, because I know from my patients that those who have never had exposure to that very often have much more sexual problems. And so, I think for psychosexual development,
Yeah.
that kind of material and that kind of exposure is of tremendous importance. So that's why I'm so, that's why...
Well, that's why I think we must talk seriously about guidelines, and that's
All
why I always start with rape, torture, and murder of women, master-slave relationship, and I'd follow it with, for want of a better word, we'll use the colloquial word, the beaver shots. That is the staple now of, you rolled your eyes like that's not a word we can say.
We'll tell you in a minute, okay? Thank you all very much for being here. Thank you for watching, and good night.
This program was produced by WNED-TV, which is solely responsible for its content. Major funding was provided by public television stations. Additional support was provided by unrestricted general program grants from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the Ford Foundation.